Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and the War Within expansion, together with the World Soul Saga, has saw a return of so many veteran players back into the game, and all of those returning players are getting to experience some of the most recent expansions for the very first time, going around collecting mounts and transmogs from the expansion of Battle for Azeroth, or maybe checking out the Torghast from the Shadowlands for the very first time, while others are getting to revisit the expansion of Legion and collect some of the transmogs and collectibles from the class order halls. And one of the pieces of content, my favorite piece of content that's been seen a lot more play and a lot more attention, is the Legion Mage Tower, a solo player challenge type of encounter that allows players to collect a variety of different transmogs, mounts, and achievements. It is definitely by far one of my favorite and most nostalgic pieces of content that I spent probably the most time with back in Legion and with the Mage Tower return during the expansion of Shadowlands. Then there's also a good portion of the player base that doesn't know what the Mage Tower is, that I've actually been hitting up by DMs asking me what that's all about and if it's worth doing. So I wanted to put together the ultimate Mage Tower guide for the War Within expansion with an updated methods for gearing for the Mage Tower encounters, as well as a guide to all of the different encounters to help you get your transmogs, your mounts, as well as all the achievements for any returning players in the War Within expansion. As always, if you want to see more War Within expansion guides, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive right in. So first things first, this was actually one of the more popular questions that I got a lot is, first of all, what is even the Mage Tower? Like if you're a returning player to the game, you haven't played in Legion, you came back in Shadowlands, you weren't even aware that there was some kind of like a unique challenge with its own set of rewards. So what is the Mage Tower? The Mage Tower is located in one of the zones from the expansion of Legion out in the Broken Isles, which you can actually travel to from Stormwind and Orgrimmar by taking a portal to a land called Azuna, and then from there you can fly all the way across to the Broken Shore, where you'll be able to encounter the Mage Tower at the Deliverance Point. The Mage Tower was a unique building added during the expansion of Legion that offered players basically a solo class challenge. Think of Zekvir from the Delves, but there was a lot more variety to these challenges because there was different fights involved for each class and spec. Well, there's a handful of them, but all of them suited different classes and specs in their own unique ways. There was a tank fight, a healer fight, and many different DPS fights, and even Disc Priest was actually part of the DPS crew because of the way that they played. There was a fight that fit better for their type of damage to heal playstyle. You basically had to defeat a powerful challenge, usually some kind of a tough boss or a number of bosses, to claim your glory, but also to unlock some unique rewards. Back in Legion, those rewards were unique artifact weapon appearances, but similar to challenge modes from Mists of Pandaria or challenge weapons from WoD. Right now, those weapons from Legion are no longer obtainable, but maybe at some point in the future. Though the Mage Tower was returned back during Shadowlands patch 9.15, I'm pretty sure, with brand new rewards, such as time warp version of some of the original sets that were available during Legion, specifically the Tomb of Sargeras sets for every single class. And you can see there's quite a difference between the actual mythic version of that set as well as the normal heroic and other counterparts, but then the time warp had another tint to it. For druids, you got this fellow green. For warlocks, you got a red Xavius kind of look. Priests got a shadowy void look to them, and a lot of them did look unique and very, very appealing. Then there's also a mount that came with the Mage Tower as well, called the Soaring Feltotem, which to this day only a handful of players actually own this mount, but it's an incredibly unique spellbook which was originally part of an art contest and then made its way into the game. As a reward for the Mage Tower, it even has its own unique special animation when it comes to the mount special, but also when you fly around on this thing, it does have some of its own unique spellbook animation specifically. And this mount is obtainable by completing every single challenge within the Mage Tower. So you're looking at the tank challenge, the healer challenge, as well as all the variety of different DPS challenges, which can be completed all on various multiple alt characters. And then there's also a bunch of achievements you can earn within the Mage Tower as well, with all the different fights and different rewards. And then there was also a big meta achievement available where you completed the Mage Tower on every single spec in the game. And that is what I did when they returned the Mage Tower back during the Shadowlands update. So there's plenty to earn from mogs to amount to different achievements if that's what you care about. And there's so many different reasons to come back to the Mage Tower since you can just access it immediately. All you have to do is walk up to the NPC that holds the Mage Tower challenge, talk to them, and they'll send you immediately to your current specs challenge in order to face off against the boss as much as you want to, and you can attempt it as many times as you want to. Mage Tower is a unique type of activity that is technically basically time walking event. It's a scale type of content that actually lowers your character's level down to 45 and places all of your gear at 120 item level, which lets you do a little bit of fun and interesting type of gearing in order to be able to scale a little bit better within the Mage Tower experience. For the most part, for most players, if you're just wearing the best gear right now in the War Within expansion, that should be more than enough as long as you can learn the fights and then play them exceptionally well. But there are some limitations. Things like tier sets are going to be fully disabled, but things like trinkets and such, all of those will function. You'll be able to gain access to all of your talents, from the class talents, spec talents, but also the hero talents, so all of those abilities are going to play a part within the Mage Tower. But I mentioned that it was a time walking event for a specific reason, because technically there's an alternative way of gearing for the Mage Tower, utilizing some of the scaled gear from older expansions. Since the gear within the Mage Tower scales to a certain level, we can actually utilize older expansions gear that will scale pretty well and will be just as functional within the Mage Tower, specifically TBC raid gear. What you're specifically looking for are TBC items with multiple sockets, because those items can then be imbued with secondary or primary stats, and those generally do well within time walking content. And the more pieces of gear with multiple sockets you can get, the better. So Sunwell Plateau will be the best raid for you to get through. It has a lot of different items. If you could get lucky enough, that could potentially be a lot of different sockets that could be equipped on that character. This gear isn't necessarily going to be better than max level gear for the Mage Tower, but it may be, at least if anything, easier than having to get some of your best in slot pieces from dungeons and raids. Like if you're just not real lucky but you still want to be able to tackle the challenge, this is an alternative way. Instead of grinding gear at max level, if you get lucky with some of those items from older raids, that could at least be some sort of a power bump for your character within the Mage Tower experience. So Sunwell Plateau is a fantastic option. Any dungeons from TBC also that offer multiple sockets from gear, those could also be just as good. And all of these items start out at 140 item level at max level, so all of them will scale down to 120 fairly well. Another item that's recommended by many players is the Dark Boon decks from this recent expansion. Specifically, Radiance is one of the ones I see recommended a ton by many players in the community. These decks are pretty decent within endgame content. Well, they do outlive their usefulness because of a lower item level, but within the Mage Tower, they actually scale pretty well and allow you to have some focused secondary stats, so you can get Radiance to pick up some of your best in slot stats as long as you can deal a little bit of damage to bosses. Once you get a couple of pieces of gear with sockets, you'll then want to gem them. And the best gems are going to be, let's say if you're a mage, you'll want to get some intellect gems. There's two really cheap ones like Kraken Eye of Intellect, which provides a 19 intellect, scales really well with the Mage Tower, but also Leviathan's Eye of Intellect. And there's the type of Kraken and Leviathans for agility and strength classes, and all of them are generally inexpensive. Afterwards, the rest of your gems should probably be filled with haste, mastery, crit, versatility gems, depending on your class. In most cases, haste is a very, very good stat for most classes, unless it's like your worst stat, then mastery or versatility may be better. But you kind of want to go for Legion gems that give you 23 of that secondary stat. So you're looking for this specific gem right here for the haste. For mastery, those gems will be called Masterful Sea Current. For classes looking for some more crit, you will look for Deadly Lava Lazuli or Versatile Dark Opals. So now let's actually get into some of these different encounters, where I'll go over the fight mechanics of what you need to do to defeat them, but I'll also give you some class recommendations of which classes I think will have an easiest time in the challenge if you're looking to level a bunch of alts in preparation for 1105 and you're looking to have the easiest time within all of those fights. The first challenge is going to be Closing the Eye, otherwise known as the Xylem Challenge, and I think for this one, honestly, I found the class of Hunter to be one of the classes that has the easiest time with this challenge in particular. So for this fight, you're fighting two bosses. First one being Xylem, is a wizard specializing in frost and arcane abilities. During phase 1 is the frost phase, where he'll mostly use frost spells like Frostbolt, which deals moderate damage, which you'll want to interrupt with stuns as well as normal kicks. But also, after a few casts of Frostbolt, he will then teleport, entrapping you in the wall of ice. For most classes, you have to use mobility abilities like a Heroic Leap, for example, in order to escape that wall of ice quickly, in order to chase after Xylem to continue doing damage, or you need to pop a defensive and break through the icicles, as touching the icicles is a guaranteed death. Hunters had the easiest time to get out of that mechanic because they could just jump and then disengage out of the wall to get back to Xylem really, really quickly. After a little bit of back and forth with Xylan between frost phases of him frostbolting you and trapping you up, he'll then go into an intermission where the boss goes invisible and creates a bunch of mirror images, but also there will be a shimmer left over exactly where he is that gives away his position. And your job is to kill the images but also make your way to that shimmer. You don't necessarily have to kill all the images, you just have to kill them in order to create a safety bubble so that you can move around easily within this part of the encounter. So you want to use mobility abilities to get from image to image, kill it very quickly, stay in a bubble to recover some health, and make your way towards that shimmer. Hunters in particular can use the ability of Flare in order to get the boss out of his invisibility stage, where other classes have to get up close and use an AoE ability in order to break his invisibility. So Hunters have it a little bit easier for this encounter specifically. Then comes phase 2, which is kind of like the arcane and shadow phase. When instead of casting frostballs, the boss will instead cast arcane barrages, which you'll want to interrupt but not as aggressively, because boss also casts another ability called Draw Power, which is a channel that helps increase his overall damage, which you'll want to save a stun or an interrupt for at all times. So interrupted barrage becomes less of a necessity, although it still does a bit of decent damage. You'll also want to dodge his shadowy barrage of orbs, which can appear from either side of the boss, so you'll want to be very careful and position yourself so you can dodge all of these orbs, making sure you don't get hit. After a couple of casts, the boss, like before, is also going to teleport, but instead of entrapping you in ice, he just goes super far away. So you want to use mobility abilities to get to him as quickly as possible. And the boss is going to swap between Frost Phase, then Intermission, then Arcane Phase, Intermission, up until he reaches 10% health, which is where the second boss of the encounter comes out. And this boss is generally pretty simple. You want to drag the boss all around the room because the boss is going to be dropping Corrupting Shadows, which will start to spread everywhere. You want to stand in Corrupting Shadows, so you want to drag the boss towards the edge of the circular arena and then kite him kind of all across the outside edge of the room. From time to time, the second boss is going to channel Seeds of Darkness at the player, which is where you want to move as far away from the boss as you can, because that seed is going to spawn some void ads that are going to waddle towards the boss to try to heal him. You want to take down those ads as quickly as possible and nuke him down, but mostly you want to focus a lot of your attention on single targeting the boss as best as you can. Hunters in particular are really good at this fight because you could use Tart Trap as well as Biting Shot and cleave down the ads with grenades in order to make this part of the encounter just a little bit easier. The next encounter is going to be an impossible foe, which is going to be the Imp Mother encounter, which I found the Fury Warrior to be one of the easiest specs to do this on specifically. This is simply just a fight against the Imp Mother. She doesn't really do a lot on her own. She does from time to time create a shield that you gotta break through in order to interrupt the boss, but for the most part, most of her mechanics are going to revolve around spawning a bunch of ads for you to deal with. Specifically, you're looking to kill the Umbral and Smoldering Imps that are going to be spawning around the Imp Mother, and you want to save AoE abilities such as the Warrior's Bladestorm, for instance, in order to be able to cleave him down as efficiently as you can. You also want to avoid getting touched by the Fuming Imps. They're not that scary, but they will leave a puddle on the ground that is going to create a bit of a slowing effect, and you'll want to try to remove as many of these puddles out of the fight as possible. You're going to want to use a lot of the room as the fight progresses. From time to time, the boss is going to spawn some imp servants who do need to be focused down a little bit. If these imp servants reach the boss, they'll start to channel to heal her. You'll want to say some kind of an AoE crowd control ability like a stun or a fear or anything along that sort in order to be able to interrupt immediately, or maybe use an AoE ability in order to nuke them down very quickly. At 50%, the boss is going to teleport away from you and will start to rain down fell boulders that will roll throughout the room. So not only do you have to start dealing with ads, but also dodging boulders, and also the boss will start to create some fell puddles that will slowly fill up the room, which is kind of where you want to pop all of your cooldowns and try to nuke the boss as quickly as possible. The longer the fight goes on, the harder it is to dodge all of the orbs while dealing and managing with all of the ads. The next encounter is going to be God's Queen Fury, otherwise known as the Sigrun fight, which is one of the tougher fights in my opinion. This is a 3-boss encounter where you'll, for the most part, want to keep these bosses together and cleave them down, but also each boss is an empowerment mechanic, and all of these bosses have very different mechanics that can have some very nasty overlaps. One of these bosses is going to be the Jarl, whose main ability is going to be, for the most part, throwing axes. Whenever he stands still to throw axes in a circular area, they're hard to dodge and they hurt a lot, so you may want to have a defensive ready for those, or have some kind of a heal nearby available at all times. One of his bigger abilities you'll want to avoid is Bladestorm. You simply just want to back away whenever he uses it. And his main empowerment ability is going to be Berserker's Rage. Whenever the boss gains Berserker Rage, he gets a big buff towards his physical damage, and for the most part, you'll want to use defenses to try to dampen the damage, but better yet, it's better to slow down the boss or throw him into some kind of a crowd control in order to avoid him for as long as possible. You basically don't want to get hit by him whenever he's enraging. The next boss is going to be a Rune Seer. He is mostly a caster enemy who mostly casts Shadow Balls throughout this fight. There isn't much you can do except interrupt that ability, it just deals quite a bit of damage. The boss also likes to place runes underground, those shrink over time. And you gotta run over those runes before they shrink all the way, or you get blown up. These runes always come in 2 sets, so when you see a first set of runes and you run over them, there's always going to be a second rune set that follows after them. This boss's big empowerment ability is Ancestral Knowledge, where he starts to cast a big nuke spell while shielded. You gotta break the shield in order to be able to properly interrupt him. Finally, we have Sigrun. Sigrun has a handful of mechanics like being able to throw a spear, which creates green puddles on the ground, which makes it a little bit hard for you to be able to move around. She also has an ability called Dark Wings, which summons a wall of Valkyr, except in every single one of the walls, there's always a gap. And you want to make sure to get in the gap of the Valkyr to avoid taking damage from that wall. Her empowerment ability is going to be Blood of the Father, where she starts to radiate massive fell damage all throughout the boss arena. You want to use targeted crowd control like Blind or Polymorph for Fear, or Repentance if you're a Retribution Paladin, or maybe potentially even a short form CC like a Stun, or even some kind of an incapacitated effect like a Sunder as an Enhancement Shaman, in order to be able to interrupt her before she finishes the cast. However, if she does finish the cast but you still land your crowd control ability, like your Polymorph, like your Blind, like your Fear, you can always just keep her CC'd in order to wait out until that AoE buff empowerment that she gets is gone, and then you could break it in order to be able to cleave down the fight. And this fight's main gimmick specifically is all of these bosses have different mechanics, and the worst part is the longer the fight goes on, the more of them start to overlap. So it's mostly about managing every single one of these bosses' mechanics individually, but it gets a little bit tougher when they start to overlap together. So focus on cleaving down as quickly as possible. The next fight is going to be Feltotem's Fall, otherwise known as the Tugar and the Worm encounter. I think out of all the DPS encounters, this one I found to be the hardest by far. Not on the damage checks or mechanics, but rather there's so many things going on at once, I felt like my brain was splitting into two. Let me explain. First, we have Tugar, one of the 2 bosses. He does a couple of things like Fell Burst, which needs to be interrupted or CC'd like with a stun. Otherwise, this ability deals a ton of damage if you don't have a defensive ready for it. You also want to step away from any of the crisscross spikes that the boss spawns, which he does pretty regularly, which means you'll be moving a lot throughout this encounter. And also he creates Fell Surge Totems, which if they're not killed, they'll stun you, and that could potentially do some bad overlaps with some of the other boss mechanics. The next boss is going to be the Worm, or at least I'll call him the Worm just to make it easier for us. The Worm boss will start out with a bunch of stacks of hardened scales, which reduces the damage that the boss takes. So for the most part, you'll start the encounter focusing mostly on Tugar. The Worm boss also casts the ability of Sonic Scream, which will interrupt you if you're mid-cast of an ability. So as a caster, you want to be sure to not cast ability in between, but also Sonic Scream as an ability does quite a bit of damage, so it may be a good idea to crowd control when the boss is about to finish the cast. The Worm will also cast the ability of Fell Shock and Fell Infused Saliva. Fell Shock is a debuff that can technically be removed, but both of those mechanics are simply, for the most part, for most classes, just a bit of damage that you have to find a way to deal with, either through the defensives or a little bit of personal healing. Periodically, the Worm is going to burrow underground, which is going to send tremors throughout the cave. This is also going to cause the top of the cave to collapse, which drops down rocks, but also drops down more eggs that will eventually hatch into more worms for you to fight with. You basically want to pull Tugar on top of the eggs and AoE them down together with the eggs, mostly focusing on Tugar. While underground, the Worm is going to periodically charge towards the player's location, and those rocks that the Worm also has created with those eggs, you want to charge the Worm through those rocks because every single rock that the Worm hits is actually going to take off a stack of the scales, making the Worm take more damage from all of your attacks. And you want to peel those scales one by one by having the Worm charge through the rocks, and eventually the Worm is going to take full damage from all of your abilities. So for the most part, the fight gimmick is to manage Tugar as well as managing the Worm, because both of them have unique mechanics that have a bit of a nasty overlap, but it's a pretty consistent overlap that you can almost always expect during key situations. And your whole job is to cleave down these bosses and eventually kill both of them almost nearly at the same time, though it's in most cases better to have Tugur die first and then take out the worm afterwards. Though once Tugur is dead, the worm does enrage, which will do significantly more damage, so you want to make sure that the worm is low enough to make sure that you can eliminate it quickly before it starts to overwhelm you towards the tail end of the encounter. Now the next encounter is called Thwarting the Twins, otherwise known as the Rayest and the Karam fight. You have two enemies that you'll be fighting against, Karam as well as Rayest. The major phases are going to be either being chased by Karam, where you want to slow him down and kite him out and then DPS him until he gets about 35% health, which is where Karam then goes dormant but Rayest becomes active, and this is more of a burn phase. Rayest is going to summon a bunch of ads, which you shouldn't really focus on. You should mostly focus on bursting down Rayest with full cooldowns as much as possible, because he'll be active for only 30 seconds, and after those 30 seconds are up, then Karam is back up to chasing him. And that's most of the fight, either running away from Karam or bursting down Rayest. And as the fight goes on, you'll then have additional ads spawn in, like Hands from Beyond, which need to be focused down as early as possible. If they complete their cast, that's a one-shot. Later down the line, Rayest is going to start making runes on the ground which need to be soaked. Those can be soaked by you or your pet if you're playing a pet class, so hunters and warlocks technically have an advantage in this fight because you can mosey your pets over towards the rune and they can soak it. Because if the rune is not soaked, it'll spawn an extra ad, one that's very, very powerful and the one that can easily one-shot you. And the phases always go in a very specific order. First, you're running from Karam. Then you have a burn phase for Rayest. Then you're running from Karam while the hand ads are spawning. Then you're burning Rayest while the runes are active. Then the final phase is you're running away from Karam, killing the hands, soaking the runes while trying to finish off Rayest as quickly as possible. And there's also a lot of these other ads and now purple puddles all over the place, making it a little bit harder for you to maneuver throughout the room. The best advice I have for you for this encounter specifically is to focus down Rayest as much as possible, especially in the last phase, and classes like Hunters in particular can have a bit of an easier time with this because your pets can actually soak those runes as well, so it gives you a little bit of flexibility of how you can run this encounter specifically. Next, we got ourselves the Highlord's Return Tank Challenge, and this one you can do on any class in the game, but honestly a lot of players really try to get this down on the Druid, which is not the easiest version, but you do get this awesome Felware bear form, so if you are going to be doing it in any class, you could do it on a Druid just to get two birds with one stone, get the transmog as well as the bear form. So for the Highlord's Return encounter, we actually covered it recently on the channel, and I have a link down that in the description below, which goes into more detail regarding all the different mechanics of this encounter. And I don't necessarily want to repeat it all over again because I feel like I did a really good job going over it in that video, so definitely follow the guide down in the description below in order to be able to get a full details on how to do the tank challenge of that fight. I did it mostly from a bear perspective, but other tank classes should be able to utilize the guide just as effectively. Now the last encounter is going to be End of the Risen Threat, otherwise known as the Healer Challenge for the Mage Tower. It is a long multi-phase encounter that has you as a healer taking care of 3 allies, a tanky warrior, a rogue, and a ranged hunter. During stage 1 of the encounter, you'll be facing off against enemy forces that will appear in various groupings. You have enemies such as the Arbalest, which doesn't really do that much damage. It will focus down your allies for the most part, but they do have a nasty ability called Mana Sting, where you want to make sure to place an ally between you and the Arbalest so you don't get stung, but they do instead. Though you do want to dispel your allies instantly because it will start doing a ton of damage to their health bar. Then we have the soldiers, which also do a bit of decent damage single target, but they also have a knife dance ability that does AoE damage to your entire party. It's best to have some kind of a crack control in order to interrupt it because that ability can really ramp up, especially if 2 of them are dancing at the same time. They also will sometimes enrage, focusing either you or one of your allies. When they focus both you at the same time, definitely have a defensive available as soon as possible, otherwise you want to make sure to keep everybody alive as best you can. Finally, we have the mages, which cast the ability of Arcane Blitz, and every time they cast Arcane Blitz, they get a buff that increases all of their damage. You basically want to have an interrupt or a crack control to interrupt every other blitz. The first blitz will deal moderate damage but won't kill anybody, but if they can continue casting blitz again and again and again, building that damage buff, that is where they get the scariest. And the hardest part is getting used to how to deal with all these different enemy groupings, like double soldier pack can be very, very scary when both of them enrage on you. It's also a good idea for this part if you're struggling with phase 1 to bloodlust it, if you have drums or bloodlust available for your class, in order to try to get through some of the tougher encounters as quickly as possible. This is definitely one of the harder encounters from the get-go when it comes to the overall healer challenge. After stage 1, you'll get a stage 2, which is not really a real stage, it's more just a stage for you to get mana, get buffed up, wait for your bloodlust to come back if you use bloodlust during P1, or change out your talents if you need to for the rest of the encounter. After you walk forward from stage 2, it starts stage 3, where all of your allies are then pulled away from you, and you'll have to be out here solo for a little bit, while also timed during the stage 3 of the encounter, where in the first room you have to kill eyeballs one at a time because they'll do a bunch of damage every time one of them explodes, and from there you want to move on into the Felspite Dominator together with some Felbats, and then you kind of clear all the way up the stairs throughout all the different enemies. As you advance further up the stairs, you'll find some souls, one of which needs to be dispelled, otherwise it's fleeing and fearing everybody around it, but also heal all the other damaged souls. In that room will also be an Arbalest, which you'll want to make sure to have a soul between you and the Arbalest in order to make sure you don't get stung by the Mana Sting. Further up, you'll progress with a couple of Fel Orbs where whenever you do damage to those things, they will kind of fade out of existence for a moment. And when you make it all the way to the top, you'll have to fight a Dread Corruptor. Dread Corruptor is also going to have a couple of those flickering eyes next to him, so you want to kill those things first, one after another. And during this encounter is where I really thought that, yeah, Restoration Shaman is definitely one of the best healers for this, because I did die during the fight with Dread Corruptor. For most classes, that's it, you gotta go back and start all over again, but technically, as long as your allies aren't dead, the encounter continues, and as a shaman you can onk in order to have a proper battle res to continue during this part of the encounter. Dying during stage 1, I think just ends the encounter completely, but dying between stages 2, 3, and 4, there you can actually use onk in order to battle res and then continue with the encounter. This is why Res Shaman is actually broken for this completely. But you'll want to kill the Dread Corruptor, stay away from any AoE beams that the boss pulls down, and also take down flickering eyes one at a time. Stage 4 is another prep stage where you get to get some mana, wait for your cooldowns, because next stage is going to be quite heal heavy. As during stage 5, your allies become mind controlled and will now start to try to kill one another. And at the same time, the boss is going to pull souls of the undead drawn towards the center of the room, which you'll want to heal. You want to prioritize healing the closest souls towards the center of the boss arena as quickly as possible, and you want to use some healing cooldowns in order to do this as efficiently as you can, while also keeping your allies that are killing each other alive. Any souls that you can't heal that make it towards the center of the fight, you'll then have to fight them later. So you'll need to pop big cooldowns in order to be able to take out as many souls as you can, and after you heal 8 souls, you get to move on to the next stage, where any souls you couldn't heal, you'll now have to fight for a short bit, which reduces your ability to pick up some mana and recover before the hardest part of the encounter, which is stage 7. Stage 7 is the final stage of this fight, where you'll have to blast the main boss and do as much damage as possible to kill him as quickly as you can. This boss will focus on attacking your allies, so you want to have to heal your allies throughout the entire encounter. The boss will also focus on the healer by jumping on you, creating a Fel zone, so you want to make sure to stay as close as you can to the green puddles in order to keep the Fel zone spread as contained as possible, preferably towards the edge of the boss arena. The boss will also cast an ability called Ignite Soul on the player, and after 9 seconds, your player character explodes, dealing damage to all of your allies. The higher your health was whenever you exploded, the more damage it does to your friends, and at max health, you could potentially one-shot them, which would end the encounter. So you need to stand in the green Fel zone to lower your health to reduce the amount of damage that Ignite Soul will do to your allies. However, you don't want to stay too low on health, because every time the boss leaps on you, it does a decent bit of damage to your health bar, and if you're too low, it can one-shot you. So you basically want to keep your allies as healthy as you can, do as much damage as possible, and contribute as much damage as possible to win this encounter, while also keeping yourself with roughly 50-ish% health at all times and no higher, as well as manage all the Fel puddles that will quickly fill the boss arena. But with that being said, that's going to be literally my guide for the Mage Tower Challenge within the War Within expansion. It's so awesome seeing so many players coming back to the game, and for some, trying out the Mage Tower Challenge for the very first time. I wish all of you the best of luck in trying to get some of your transmogs, achievements, as well as the Mage Tower mount, which is to this day one of the more rarer mounts based on some of the websites that track mount and achievement progressions. As always, I want to thank all of you guys so much for watching this guide update, and I hope all of you guys did enjoy this video. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give this video a like. I would very much appreciate it. Join our Discord community if you got any more questions regarding the Mage Tower Challenge or need some pointers regarding how to gear using TBC items. Also, let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.